I want to talk to you about a New Testament Greek word, latrevo, which means cultic or religious service. Now, this is different than the normal word for worship or the general word proskineo, as opposed to latrevo. So Bauer's lexicon says about proskineo, it's used to express in attitude or gesture one's complete dependence on or submission to a high authority figure. So then it has human beings like the female slave toward her lord, or kyrios in Matthew 18. Note, by the way, that kyrios can be used for others apart from God. So that female slave is worshiping her lord. And also to Peter by Cornelius in Acts 10:25. And of course, Jesus, who's rendered homage or worship as Messianic King and Helper throughout the New Testament. Another difference here about these two words comes from a book by Percival, a digest of theology. But while it's true of the Hebrew of the Old Testament that there's no word which refers alone to divine worship, a peculiarity of the English and Latin languages as well as of the Hebrew, this is not true of the Septuagint Greek, nor of the Greek of the New Testament. For in both, proskineo has its general meaning, sometimes applying to the creature, sometimes to the creator, but latrevo is used to denote divine worship alone. And also, Dr. Dunn, in his book, in no case in the New Testament is there talk of offering cultic worship to Jesus. Larry Hurtado, another evangelical scholar, recognizes the exclusive God reference for latrevo, that's a different form of the word, but does not comment further. So that's an interesting comment there, because most of scholarship of the high-ranking nature, if you will, recognizes that this is a very specialized word, and it's always in reference to God or Yahweh, the one God of Israel. But there is a argument out there used by some, as it's told to us here in this book by McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. So they say, it also bears noting that the Greek Septuagint translation of service in Daniel 7:14 uses the Greek word latrevo when describing the service that all people, nations, and languages shall bring to the Son of Man. Latrevo denotes the very highest form of worship and religious service, a kind that is to be given only to Yahweh. This again suggests that the Son of Man refers to more than a mere human being. Moreover, it would certainly be rather odd if the text were saying that religious service was to be rendered to an entire nation rather than an individual. So this reflects a argument that's used by very few, especially Trinitarians and others who believe Jesus is God in the absolute sense, to somehow argue that this special word related to worship is used for the Son of Man. Now, this is the famous chapter where the Son of Man comes on the clouds, as witnessed by the prophet Daniel. And he goes on to talk about the kingdom being handed over to the people of God, the sons of the Most High, is the phrase used. But is this really what Daniel is saying? So the verse in question is verse 14. The Son of Man was given the dominion, honor, the kingdom, all nations, tribes, and languages shall serve, so there's the latrevo word, him. Now, something though that is not told to us is that the word translated latrevo from the Aramaic, it's believed that Daniel was written in a mix of Aramaic and Hebrew. So the same word in the Aramaic is not translated as latrevo in verse 27. It's another Greek word, as you see. So what is happening here? Well, what's happening is that the translation of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, was rendered by a couple of people. One of them was called Aquila. So as you can see there, Aquila rendered the word in verse 14 as latrevo, but was later translated as douleo, a neutral word meaning to serve, by another Old Greek translator called Theodosius. So there's a discrepancy here between the early translators of the Old Testament. Another point that they don't tell you about is that some translations on verse 27, so you see there it has obey him, but some translations have obey them. So that's simply because the manuscripts vary between obey him, the Son of Man, in verse 27, and obey them, that is, the sons of the Most High God, which is the subject of the whole vision here. How the Son of Man, representing the sons of the Most High God, will eventually establish the kingdom on earth that supersedes all other kingdoms. And lastly, scholars say the Theodosian text, which does not have latrevo in verse 14, is superior to the others. And for that, see a Dictionary of Christian Biography by Henry there. Now also, let's look at the fact that the first Adam, like the second Adam, was also worshipped. So even if latrevo is taken there as legitimate by the translation of Aquila, Karen Jones in this paper says that it's possible to use latrevo for someone other than God, but only in furtherance of the worship of the one God. In a Christian portion of the Sibylline Oracle, we read that all things in the world serve, and this document dated from the 1st century AD, the Oracle, uses a form of the word latrevo. So they will serve Adam because he's made in the form morphe of God. That's the famous word also used in Philippians 2 when Paul describes Jesus as being in the image and morphe, or form, of God. So we also have extra biblical evidence here, although not scripture, but certainly giving us an understanding that even if that rare word is used there for the Son of Man, Jesus, it shows us that in Judaism there was such an acceptance of the one representing God from the first Adam to the second Adam, how this sort of divine cultic worship could also be rendered.